wonder if you can put your hand in the air if at any point since your SCAD you felt that you've had a need to access some psychological help. Okay. Now keep your hand in the air if you actually got some help. So quite a difference in numbers, more people feeling the need for help than actually getting the help, really. So that leads me to wonder what it is that stops us from getting the help that we feel that we might need and might benefit from. And as a part of that, I'll have a look at how we might look at the support that we need, where we might get that from, and how we might use that support. Some of you will be very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and some of you will be less so. But it's interesting to look at the very bottom level in terms of the basic physiological needs, because you're looking at food, water, air, which will include getting some exercise and some sleep. And various of our speakers today have already spoken about the benefits of getting exercise, the benefits, well, Sally was going to talk in particular, wasn't she, about food and mood and so on, and sleep as well. If we're not feeling great, it can sometimes be difficult to get a good night's sleep. And yet, lack of sleep, lack of exercise, poor nutrition can all lead to much lower levels of resilience and therefore being able to deal with some of the emotions that we're trying to process and feel at the time. And then obviously feeling safe, and if you've had a SCAD, then there may be some questions in your own mind, and I've heard some of you talking today about, will I have another one and what might happen and how will I cope? And then the rest of it is just feeling a part of a group and feeling that you belong in life, and then self-actualisation, so in terms of your own self-esteem. And when Harriet was talking earlier about the changes in her identity and changes in job role, she may have been at a level where she felt she knew herself, and many of you might feel the same, and then post-SCAD feel that's quite different, so feeling quite a different place in terms of that hierarchy. So let's start with some self-help, because actually there's a lot that you can do for yourselves, and many of you will have found that out already and be doing a lot of it. You have your friends and you have your family, and at times that can be really helpful and at times that can be challenging, particularly when you're all coping with the same event in different ways. So for somebody who's experienced the SCAD, they may have fears, they perhaps feel they can't communicate with their partner, and vice versa. So it can be quite challenging for you, I'm sure. We've mentioned food, sleep, exercise. Most of us have smartphones these days, and there are an awful lot of apps available, many free of charge that you can download, that can help in terms of depression and anxiety and mindfulness and so on. Yoga and meditation, mindfulness generally. Quite often just being able to take a few moments and just breathe can really help. It can bring the heart rate down, and it can just help us to calm down enormously. And again, there are apps available there. Lots of online resources. When you start to look, you'll find that there are a huge number of resources available. Some of it will be NHS, some of it will be other charities and organisations where there's various workbooks and things that you can have a look at. And you can also buy plenty of books out there in terms of overcoming various feelings that you have, whether it's depression or anxiety and so on. And obviously beat SCAD and your Facebook and the group of people that you have around here. That sounds like a really fantastic resource. So, continue to link into that and make the most of that. Some people find keeping a journal or a blog or a vlog can be really helpful as well. Sometimes we find if we're keeping all of those thoughts inside our own heads, they get stuck in our heads and they just go round and round and round. Whereas if you're able to write about it or talk about it, then somehow getting it out can help make sense of it, and it can help to process it and make it easier for you. And likewise, if you've got any arts and crafts or any other hobbies, they kind of draw on mindfulness but get you into a zone of creativity and getting you away from that immediate issue. So you can add into that things like gardening and walking and all sorts of things. In terms of the NHS, I've heard some of you mention that you've approached GPs and asked for some psychological help, and that hasn't always been forthcoming. If you feel able to, and sometimes if you're feeling anxious or you're feeling a bit depressed, you don't feel able to ask again. But I would encourage you to not let the GP off the hook, because there is some support available. Some of that will be what we call psychoeducation, so it'll be letting you know or helping you get an understanding of why you're feeling what you're feeling, and let you know that actually it's quite normal. Abby talked there about the grief and the stages of grief, for example. And if you work with a wellbeing practitioner, you might find yourself getting some online CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, so looking at what's triggering your thinking and how you're responding to what's going on for you. And that can be delivered by phone or face-to-face. And the NHS do also offer some higher intensity, longer term CBT and EMDR, eye movement deprocess. I can't remember. Do you know? I can't remember. Desensitisation and reprocessing. Thank you. I should know. I do it. Which is very much focused on working with people post-trauma. It's a way of working specifically with trauma. Of course, you could access private psychotherapy or counselling, which gives you a choice of therapist, location, and the type of therapy and when you want it, but obviously there's a cost attached to that. Someone mentioned earlier the EAP, the Employee Assistance Programmes. If you're working for somebody and then you speak to your HR department or your occupational health, they should be able to give you, or most organisations actually will give you that information quite separately. You can phone the EAP and they'll do an assessment, and they can either then give you some telephone support or some face-to-face support from a counsellor. I was talking to somebody earlier who said that their EAP had been really helpful, and they'd had about between 4 and 6 sessions face-to-face, and they found that really valuable. And there are a lot of counselling charities around. Most towns will have a charity that doesn't provide free counselling, but it will be low cost, and they often take your income into account, so the fee will be on a sliding scale. Medication. We've heard quite a bit today about the medication in terms of the heart and how all of that works. There's also quite a bit of medication that's available in terms of psychological help. I often hear people are reluctant to use it, and I completely understand that, but it can be really helpful for some people in the very short term at least. It's all NICE approved, and it's all only ever prescribed in accordance with NHS guidance. And there's a range of different medications. They're the 4 main groupings: antipsychotic, antidepressant, mood stabilisers, and anxiolytics. The way they work, and I preface this with a very strong disclaimer in that I'm not a medic, I'm not a GP. I've had some basic training on some of the medications. But the way it seems to work, and you'll recognise some of these names like dopamine and serotonin, the way that we communicate our mood within our brain is through the neurotransmitters, such as the serotonin and the dopamine. They move between the nerve endings in the brain. So this is where the communication is happening. It's going from nerve ending to nerve ending along those neural pathways in our brains. The neurotransmitters take that message along from nerve to nerve. What the medication does is it interrupts this point of travel where the neurotransmitters are moving along. So it will either prevent the reuptake or it will reduce the amount of neurotransmitters that are moving along, and in that way can alter the emotional feeling that you have. Does that make sense? In terms of therapies, there are around 400 and odd different types of therapy, and I'm clearly not going to list them all today. Talking therapy, counselling is probably the one that you're probably most familiar with, where you're able to meet somebody one-to-one and talk about what's bothering you and then explore that. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, many of you will have heard of that, and a lot of the self-help books are based on that model and that approach, where you're looking at the trigger, so something that any of the senses might be a bit of music that causes you to recall something, and then it's how you respond to that. So it helps you understand that process. EMDR, which we've touched on. Life coaching is also really helpful for some people. So it's not working at a therapeutic level, but it's maybe helping come towards that acceptance and rebuilding of life stage. Hypnotherapy, which works with the subconscious, is really good for phobias, anxieties, addictions and generally changing habits. And then mindfulness, which I mentioned briefly. So you're in the moment, grounded, and it helps you to relax and de-stress. So I would encourage you all to think about your support network, so your personal support networks, because you have family, you have friends, you have, well, it's a handful of resource really. Family, friends, you've got your consultants, you've got the lovely people at Leicester, you've got SCAD, and in the case of an emergency, up your sleeve, you've obviously got the emergency service as well. When you're not feeling great, go to different people in turn. They may or may not be in a position where they are able to hear what you're saying and respond. So go back to the beginning and start again. That's why I say with your GP, if your GP hasn't responded initially, go back and have another go, because the second time you ask, they may be in a different place and may be more able to hear what you're saying. And I think there's a list of information there, and I'm going to give Karen a list of different web links and self-help resources that you'll be able to access after this conference as well. Okay. And that's me done. Thank you. So now I'm going to hand you over. Many of you probably know Catherine Beck already.